morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Press, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in. We're going to continue now with Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. Remember, yesterday we began Chapter 2, and a chapter dedicated to enlightening the people who Ignatius Loyola was, the founder of the Jesuit order, the first Jesuit general. Ignatius Loyola, the sons of Loyola, the Jesuits are often called, and they are indeed the creation of Ignatius Loyola. We started out by saying that an early historian said that Ignatius Loyola did no miracles, but later historians said that Ignatius Loyola performed more miracles, even raising a stillborn child to life, that Ignatius Loyola did more miracles than Jesus Christ himself. This is an outright attempt to elevate Ignatius Loyola to godlike status. And Ignatius Loyola is revered in the Roman Catholic Church and commemorate him by a painting that one would call the apotheosis of Ignatius Loyola. The Jesuit order being the most powerful, the most influential, the most controlling of all the monastic orders of the Roman Catholic Church. First created to whip the church into shape, the Roman Catholic Church into shape, and then to defeat the Protestant Reformation and everything that rose out of the Protestant Reformation, that being governments of, by, and for the people, and to conquer the whole world for the Pope. That was Ignatius Loyola's early plans. But we were dealing specifically about the apotheosis of Ignatius Loyola and the raising him to godlike status among the Roman Catholic Church by all of these so-called miracles that he performed. Now, backing up one paragraph for continuity purposes this morning, we'll begin with the first full paragraph on page 33. It says, "It is singularly strange in the present reading and enlightened age, these pretended miracles are cited by Jesuits to prove that divine power and authority were conferred upon Ignatius Loyola because God chose him to accomplish special objects in his name, when the very things which they allege he was providentially appointed to defeat have transpired in spite of him, his successors, and all their followers." Now, what is that? Protestantism, right? I mean, the Jesuit order has been in existence for nearly 500 years, and yet it has not yet conquered Protestantism. At least not here at this place, at this location, not here at Inquisition Update. And one need not doubt that there still remains in the world many republics, many constitutional republics that followed the lead of the Protestant Reformation, threw off their papal monarchies, threw off tyranny, and elected their own governments and wrote their own laws. Many, many nations in the world have followed the example of the United States of America, a Protestant nation. Now it says the suppression. Now here's what the Jesuits were created to do. This is what still succeeds after the creation of the Jesuit order. Still exists 500 years later. Look, the question has to be asked. If Ignatius Loyola really was crowned by God to defeat the Protestant Reformation and to restore the papacy to world supremacy, destroy all independent governments, and subject the governments of the world to the Pope, why hasn't it been accomplished? Is God a failure? Did Ignatius Loyola somehow fail God in his mission to destroy the Protestant Reformation? Or is the Jesuit order what I claim it to be? A diabolical, not a divine, but a diabolical order. Now he says the suppression of the Protestant Reformation and the extermination of Protestantism, its legitimate fruit, were the avowed purposes of himself, that's Ignatius Loyola, and his society, the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order, because according to them, the curse of God rested upon these, that is, the Protestant Reformation, as the excess of unpardonable heresy. He regards Protestantism an unpardonable heresy. Now it says, for the accomplishment of these objects, he converted the members of his society into a compact body of militia, and placed in their hands weapons chosen by himself, instructed them that they were specially selected as executioners of the divine vengeance. Okay, every Jesuit sees himself as an executioner of God's vengeance upon the heretic Protestants. I know from long years of experience, it's very, very difficult to convince people that the Jesuit order has one purpose in the world, and that is to destroy Protestantism and everything that resulted from the Protestant Reformation. But here we have in explicit terms by this author, R.W. Thompson, Secretary of the American Navy, a military man, looking at the life of another military man and describing his purpose. And that is to execute the divine vengeance upon the Protestant Reformation. R.W. Thompson is telling us in the most clear terms that Protestantism, that is true biblical Christianity, has a lethal enemy, an enemy that is sworn to continue until Protestantism is completely defeated. Now that's what R.W. Thompson says, and it's corroborated by most of the other authors that we've read here on Inquisition Update. Independent authors that have written books over a period spanning hundreds of years, it's all saying the same thing. The Jesuit order is dedicated. Its sole purpose for existence is to destroy the Protestant Reformation, true biblical Christianity. Now, for those just tuning in, it would be wise if we would work to discover the means by which this Jesuit order have availed themselves to destroy the Protestant Reformation and our Protestant form of government. Now, it says, yet the Reformation progressed until it marked out new paths of advancement for the nations. And Protestantism has extended its beneficent influences until it is today the controlling power in human affairs, and has even taken possession of places where the papacy once ruled with sovereign and unchallenged authority. And the great work thus begun in the face of Jesuit maledictions and curses has not yet ended, for Protestantism still continues to build up nations, elevate and improve peoples, and make mankind freer, happier, and more prosperous. While there has not been one single period of time since the Jesuits existed as a society when they have not been odious in all parts of the world, and have not been regarded as the plotters of mischief and the disturbers of the public peace. Okay? There's not been one period of time when the Jesuit order has not been reviled by every nation on the planet, except one, the United States of America. And it says, how can a thoughtful mind account for these results by any known process of human reasoning if it were true that Loyola had divine power conferred upon him expressly for the purpose of exterminating Protestantism as a heresy? And how, if his Society of Jesus has been providentially endowed with faculties to consummate his ends, could it have happened that one of the wisest and best of the popes, for whom infallibility is now claimed, as Pope Clement XIV, was constrained or forced to condemn the Jesuit order by positive suppression, and to declare under the solemn responsibilities of his sacred office as the Pope that it was not worthy of longer existence? But leaving these questions unanswered for the present, it is sufficient to say here that no qualities possessed by Ignatius Loyola, whatever they were, can oblige the present age to recognize his society as entitled to any such prerogatives and immunities as exempt it from having its real worth tested by the rules universally accepted as applicable to human conduct and affairs. It must now be tried by these rules, and if it shall be found that its conduct has been marked by wrong and injustice, its boastful claim of superiority will appear to every investigator as merely vain and presumptuous. That's what R.W. Thompson says. That it's time for the Jesuit order to be examined just as any other secular human institution. And if it fails the test, it should be done away with. Okay? Now it says that Loyola was shrewd and sagacious and laid his plans with a full and intelligent comprehension of the ends he had in view, ought not to be denied. When engaged in framing the constitution of the Jesuits, he was familiar with the troubles existing in the Roman Catholic Church and with the prevailing public sentiment with reference to their causes, that is, the unfitness for the proper discharge of spiritual functions of those charged with their exercise. In other words, Ignatius Loyola realized how morally defunct the Roman Catholic Church was. It was in dire need of reformation. And it says the Jesuits themselves assert this in explanation of the necessity for the establishment of theirs as a new society, declaring that the numerous orders then existing, such as the Benedictines, the Dominicans, and the Franciscans, and the Mennonites, and others, were incompetent to arrest the decline of the church on account of their own need of reform. Okay? You know what? Here's just to put it in the simplest terms, Ignatius Loyola discovered the same corruptions, the same disqualifying corruptions in Rome and in the monastic orders and in the priesthood and in the cardinalate and every other aspect of the Roman Catholic Church. He found the same corruptions as did Martin Luther. And he, just like Martin Luther, demanded a reform in the Roman Catholic Church and made himself the agent of that reform. This is what happened. This was the original purpose and intent of Ignatius Loyola, to whip the church into shape. Look, everybody was fleeing from the Roman Catholic Church. They'd found Christ in the Protestant Reformation. They were sick and tired of the corruption. Just like Martin Luther, who went to Rome and saw for himself the corruption, left the Roman Catholic Church. And everybody else was leaving for the same reasons. And not only that, but they had, for the first time in their lives, assurance of salvation in Christ. Remember, in the Roman Catholic Church, you're never truly saved. You have to participate in the sacraments. You have to confess your sins to a priest and gain absolution for your sins constantly. You have to pay for indulgences and mass cards for the dead. Why, in the Roman Catholic Church, even after death, you have no assurance of salvation. But when they came out of the Roman Catholic Church and they got a copy of the Bible to read for themselves in their own language, they suddenly came to realize that Jesus paid it all. They had assurance of salvation. And they proclaimed the assurance of salvation in Christ Jesus. And the Roman Catholic Church, ever since that day, has called that a heresy. And they say that the Protestant belief in the assurance of salvation through the blood of Christ and Christ alone, that you have committed the sin of presumption. You see, the gospel, once read and comprehended and understood by people who were once Catholic, much, much preferred Jesus Christ than the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope. And if you add that together with all of the abject, visible, pervasive, and public corruption of the Roman Catholic Church, it just made common sense to leave the Catholic Church. It could not be the Church of Jesus Christ to exist the way it did. And Ignatius Loyola saw that the decline of the Roman Catholic Church was much attributed to the filth and corruption among the Roman Catholic priesthood and among the monastic order. Just to give you one example, historians have said that the nunneries were simply brothels for the priests. Okay, that's as far as I need to go. That's how high the corruption was. That's how bad it was. And Ignatius Loyola determined within himself to singularly whip the Roman Catholic Church into shape and stop the corruption, to reform the church. Was the same motivation behind Martin Luther originally. And I think Martin Luther eventually came to the realization that this church is irreformable. It is what it is. It is what it was prophesied to be, the church of Antichrist. And so once that was determined from the Scriptures, the only answer was to leave, to get out. And that's what they did. Now, Ignatius Loyola, who's supposedly a miracle worker even greater than Christ, who has given that the Protestant Reformation was an abject heresy and a sin against the Roman Catholic Church, a rebellion against the legitimate authority of Jesus Christ on the earth, was going to defeat Protestantism and bring all the Protestants either back to the Roman Catholic Church or lop off their heads, and to destroy all the governments that were created by Protestants. In other words, to conquer the whole world for the Pope. Now, but it was reform of the Roman Catholic Church, which was his first motivation. And it says, this point in their history should invite the closest attention and scrutiny, because it shows in a conspicuous degree the basis of their assumed superiority over all other societies and orders which, in the course of time, have had the sanction of the Roman Catholic Church. And this scrutiny is desirable, moreover, inasmuch as it will be seen that the pictures of demoralization, now, not in turn, I want my listeners to understand the author's use of the word demoralization. You know, you might see yourself having been defeated in a battle as being demoralized. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about the moral corruption of the Roman Catholic Church. The demoralization or the filth of the Roman Catholic Church. It says, and this scrutiny is desired for, moreover, inasmuch as it will be seen that the pictures of demoralization prevailing among the clergy, in other words, the widespread sinfulness of the clergy, as they were drawn by the reformers in the most vivid coloring, and had their accuracy vouched for by Ignatius Loyola himself to justify the establishment of his Society of Jesus, not merely because it would constitute a distinct, independent, and superior organization, but would bring back all dissenters to obedience, which he made its main and fundamental purpose. He's going to bring everybody back to obedience. He's going to bring the Protestants back to obedience. To whom? To the Pope. Okay? The Protestants are currently in obedience to Christ, but Ignatius Loyola is going to bring them back to the obedience of the Pope. That was his main and fundamental principle. To defeat the Protestant Reformation, denounce it as heresy, and bring them all back to the Roman Catholic Church, and put them back under the authority of the papal monarchy. Now it says, one of the leading Jesuit authorities, an author upon whom the Society relies to make known that part of its history considered favorable, endeavors to maintain the proposition that it was absolutely obligatory for Loyola to have been entrusted with the duty of, quote, reforming the morals of the people of Rome, unquote, immediately within the shadow of the Vatican. Now, just not to be repetitious, but it bears emphasis that this is exactly the sentiments that Martin Luther had after having once visited Rome. That right there in the shadow of the walls of the Vatican were brothels lined up and down the street for servicing the priests. Kind of vice. And there were no better customers for the prostitutes than the priests. Martin Luther was shocked, and Ignatius Loyola saw the same demoralizing condition of Rome. Rome, right there in the shadow of the Vatican. And he said he represents the task as, quote, most difficult and important, as at that time the people were much demoralized and indulged in the most frightful excesses, notwithstanding the papal government with plenary and absolute powers had existed there during all the period of the Middle Ages, nearly 1,000 years. Unbelievable corruption. That's what Ignatius Loyola was all about. We'll talk about it more when we get back from the break.
You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.com worldwide. Freedom is never free. We need your support today at FirstAmendmentRadio.com.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Have you seen the Left Behind movies? Have you read the Left Behind fictional book series? Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy. in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. Because they see the world stage shaping to fulfill what they have been led to believe is sound biblical interpretation, a left-behind rapture scenario, this false view of prophecy is reinforced in the mind, not only of its adherents, but also includes those who have been merely exposed to the specific media. Is it possible that false prophecy can be fulfilled? The rapture theories have always been in dispute. Pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib disputes have risen up in exclusively evangelical circles of recent history, so that when true believers don't suddenly disappear, this element will easily go by the wayside when all see a new Jewish temple begin to be built. Will this be part of the great delusion that will come upon the whole earth? It seems that this great prophetic delusion has already overcome practically the entire American evangelical and Christian world. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. To learn more, visit crosstheborder.org. That's CROSS, crosstheborder.org.
Record budget deficits, bankruptcies galore, and the U.S. dollar is at an all-time low. With today's gloomy economic outlook, safe investments are often hard to find. For over a decade, Melody Cedarstrom at Discount Gold and Silver Trading Company has been helping people secure their future by investing in the precious metals. Melody has the honesty, integrity, and experience that is often lacking in the precious metals business. Let her put it to work for you. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 800-375-4188. That's 800-375-4188.
Welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. Ignatius Loyola set about to reform the Roman Catholic Church. It was in bad need of reform, as history makes abundantly clear. And it says he represents this task of reform as, quote, most difficult and important, as at that time the people were much demoralized. In other words, morally depraved. The people at that time were morally depraved and indulged in the most frightful excesses, unquote. Notwithstanding, the papal government with plenary and absolute powers had existed there during all the period of the Middle Ages, nearly 1,000 years. So, stop and think about this. Here we are at Rome, St. Peter's in Rome, God's capital of the world in the Roman Catholic mind, where the representative of Jesus Christ himself sits on the throne of St. Peter. I mean, this is the capital of the kingdom of heaven, right? That's how it is viewed by the Roman Catholic Church. That's how Ignatius Loyola viewed it. And it had reigned almost without challenge for 1,000 years. Now, how could it be that in the shadows of the Vatican, the very seat of authority of God in the world, how could it be that in the shadow of the walls of the Vatican there was so much depravity? And he says, not content alone with asserting that the people were much demoralized, morally depraved, this same author affirms in addition that Loyola, quote, sought to reform the monastic orders and reanimate the priesthood with a holy fervor, unquote, thus alleging that the monastic orders and the priesthood were demoralized just like the people and needed that a new guardian of their morals, other than and better than any the Roman Catholic Church had ever furnished, should be empowered to regulate their conduct. Okay? So the very monastic orders set up by the papacy to regulate the conduct of the people ministers for the church, the Benedictines, the Franciscans, on and on and on, they were just as morally corrupt as the papacy itself. Look, as we've discovered in all the books that we've read here on Inquisition Update, whenever there is papal authority, wherever the Pope rules supreme without challenge, what results is widespread systemic corruption, immorality, filth of the highest order. That's what Martin Luther found, and that's what Ignatius Loyola found in Rome. And, by the way, that's what we're finding in Washington, D.C. today, and it's because of the influence of Rome upon the governors in charge of operating our government. Jesuit influence, Vatican influence in our government has given the governors of our country license to sin because they serve the Pope. In their minds, they serve the voice of God in the world. And all their sins are pardoned. And that's why there's so much corruption in Washington, D.C. It's just history repeating itself. It's nothing unusual. This is typical of when the Vatican has control. Corruption abounds. Now it says, in further explanation of the reason why Ignatius Loyola desired to establish the Society of Jesuits, he represents him as having addressed directly to the Pope, that is, Pope Paul III, this argument, quote, "It appears that this society, the Jesuits, is absolutely necessary for the eradication of those abuses with which the Church is afflicted," unquote. So there's the purpose for the Jesuit order. This is the argument that Ignatius Loyola posed to Pope Paul III. That this society, the Society of Jesus, the Jesuit order, is absolutely necessary to eradicate the corruption with which the Church is afflicted. Now, at another place, referring to the condition of the Roman Catholic Church in Germany, he says it was, quote, "mainly attributable to the ignorance of the people, and more dangerous still, to the shortcomings of the priesthood, abandoned to the gratification of their own passions." Okay? That's wrong. That's what's wrong with the church in Germany. They're absolutely morally depraved. Okay? There's no order. They're just all about satisfying or gratifying their own passions. So you can see how widespread this corruption gets. Look, you know, when you are possessed of a spirit of the divine right, corruption results. And that's the superiority attitude that all Roman Catholics possess to some degree or another. They believe that they belong to the one holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church, the only church on earth wherein salvation is even obtainable. They have the popes, they have Mary, they have canon law, they have the saints, they have indulgences, they have the sacraments, they have everything. And it's the one true church of Jesus Christ. And just belonging to the Roman Catholic Church means something to Roman Catholics. That they are God's chosen people. And that no matter what sin they commit, they belong to the church. And heaven will be their home because they belong to the church. And so corruption just runs rampant. Okay, this same spirit has governed the Roman Catholic Church, and it is also reflected in all the governments under which the papacy controlled. Widespread corruption. That's what led to the Protestant Reformation. widespread corruption in the one holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church. Okay, Germany was corrupt for the same reason. The priests and the monks all were just about gratifying their own passions. And it says, in the entire city of Worms, and this is a continuation of the quote, he said, in the entire city of Worms, there was but one priest worthy of respect, unquote. You don't suppose Ignatius Loyola was acknowledging Martin Luther as the only priest in Germany worthy of respect, do you? Well, that's the inference here, and it says, neither Martin Luther nor the Reformers could have employed apter words to justify themselves, nor could those of the present time, who comment upon the vices which then prevailed among the Roman Catholic clergy, express themselves in stronger language. So here we have the very justification that Ignatius Loyola uses to justify the Jesuits is the very same argument that Martin Luther used to justify the Protestant Reformation. So no one need to doubt the widespread corruption at that time in the Roman Catholic Church. It says the well-established historical fact is that the same condition of things existing throughout the leading nations of Europe, beginning at Rome and reaching out in every direction, having the papacy as its common center. So there you have the center of the corruption, the man of sin, the son of perdition, the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist, the Pope of Rome. And it says, when the Jesuits, therefore, bestow their curses upon Martin Luther and the other Protestant reformers for having proclaimed the necessity for reform in the Roman Catholic Church because of the demoralization or the moral depravity of the clergy, they show their memories to be short in forgetting that their society was justified by its founder, Ignatius Loyola, upon the plea of the same necessity. So there you have it, in explicit terms. And it says Loyola was fully advised also of the progress made by the Protestant Reformation, and doubtless persuaded himself to believe that the necessity for reform would be made available by others of less ambition than himself, who would be likely to seek for it elsewhere than through the papacy, under whose auspices so many evils had grown up, unless he could check the progress of the Reformation by the creation of some new and opposing influences which he could himself control. In other words, because the Protestant Reformation was so successful, he had to take up the business of reforming the Roman Catholic Church as an alternative for leaving the Roman Catholic Church and joining the Protestant Reformation. This is where we get the term to describe the Jesuit order as the Counter-Reformation. The Protestant Reformation offered an answer to all the corruption and doctrinal errors of the Roman Catholic Church. True biblical Christianity. And Ignatius Loyola had to counter that. And he had to first start by reforming the church. The very thing that Martin Luther tried to do. Now, he says there were no fundamental points of Christian doctrine involved, and if there had been, the whole life of Ignatius Loyola proves that he would have regarded them of inferior importance compared with his main purpose of preventing the enlightenment of society by free religious thought and holding it in obedience to authority superior to himself. Okay, the point R.W. Thompson is going to make repeatedly here is that Ignatius Loyola was never motivated by doctrinal reform. In his mind, the Roman Catholic Church was perfect in its doctrine. Otherwise, it could not be known as the one holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church. No, Ignatius Loyola was a warrior, and his sole purpose was to get control of the people of Europe and return them to the Roman Catholic Church. His mission was a military mission. It was all about the temporal power of the Pope, extending the temporal power of the Pope over the whole world. It was never about doctrine. Because if he had challenged the doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church, he would have become ipso facto an enemy of the papacy, and an enemy of the Roman Catholic Church. He would have, in a sense, been a Protestant reformer. Because what motivated the Protestants more than anything was doctrine. They saw, after once having read God's book for themselves, they saw the doctrinal error of the Roman Catholic Church. And it was because of that doctrinal error they became convinced that the Roman Catholic Church was the synagogue of Satan. Ignatius Loyola was never had anything to do about doctrinally reforming the church. He was only about extending the authority of the papacy as the vicar of Christ on earth. That every man, woman, and child had a spiritual and moral responsibility to obey the Pope. And every government of the world had the responsibility to obey the Pope. So you can see the differences in the motivation. Reform was common between Ignatius Loyola and the Protestant reformers. But the one thing the reformers had that Ignatius Loyola didn't even deal with was the doctrinal corruption of the Roman Catholic Church. And it says the friendly author already quoted declares his object to have been to, quote, reestablish those principles of submission and discipline which alone can ensure obedience to legitimate authority, unquote. That is, to the combined authority of church and state, as no other was at that time considered legitimate by him, or has ever been by his society since then. So here is the purpose: to obtain the obedience of all the world to the Pope. That's to extend the temporal power of the Pope globally. This was his only end, and the means to achieve that end was to unify church and state. Ignatius Loyola's number one job in defeating the Protestant Reformation was to get control of the governments of the world and to make them submissive to the Pope. And then the Pope, through the governments of the world, could govern the people and force them back into the Roman Catholic Church. And I maintain that's precisely what is happening in the United States today. That our government, while it professes is becoming Christian, it is in fact becoming Roman Catholic. And the reforms and the Constitution is being destroyed, liberty is being destroyed, and we are being coerced to participate in a new system called the New World Order by force. And I maintain when all this becomes readily apparent, those who do not participate, who wish not to participate in this New World Order, are going to be denied the very essentials of life. Okay? Going to be denied a living, going to be denied our social benefits, we're going to be denied jurisprudence, we're going to be denied the basic necessities of life, even health care. We're going to be labeled heretics. And they can call us whatever they want, domestic terrorists or whatever else, enemy combatants, domestic combatants, however they decide to color it. But that will be, the true classification will be heretics. Anybody who does not submit to this new Vatican control through the civil power are going to be rejected and persecuted. Now it says the acute and penetrating intellect of Ignatius Loyola enabled him to foresee that unless some new method of counteracting the effects of the Protestant Reformation could be discovered, the disintegration of the Church already begun, that is, the disintegration of the Roman Catholic Church already begun, could not be arrested. Let me read this again. I want this to soak in. I don't mean to treat you like you're dense, but some things that I have experience in talking about these things for years on amateur radio, and it just simply tends to fly right over the heads of my listeners. He said the acute and penetrating intellect of Loyola enabled him to foresee that unless some new method of counteracting the effects of the Protestant Reformation could be discovered, the disintegration of the Roman Catholic Church already begun could not be arrested. In other words, the very existence of the Roman Catholic Church was at stake because of the Protestant Reformation. I want my listeners to understand that the Roman Catholic Church sees Protestantism as its most lethal opponent. That Protestantism is the only power in the world that ever truly threatened the existence of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, in that case, it's clear for any of us to realize that mission number one for a global Vatican New World Order, any hope for success of the Pope ruling the world, it must destroy Protestantism. If there's any hope in the Pope ruling this world, Protestantism must be destroyed. Rome has already seen what the truth of the Scriptures can do to the Roman Catholic Church. It nearly destroyed it 500 years ago. They realized this. They recognized this. Now, what efforts do you suppose are being exerted in this country today to destroy the Protestant Reformation so that the Pope's New World Order can succeed? Well, the very first order of business of the Jesuits was to destroy any knowledge that the papacy is the biblical, historical, and prophetic Antichrist. And they did that through futurism. Now, my regular listeners are going to roll their eyes. Tom's going to go through this again. It needs to be repeated and repeated and repeated until everybody understands. The power of the Protestant Reformation was the recognition that the papacy was the Antichrist. The Roman Catholic Church was the synagogue of Satan. And everybody realized it, and that's why they came out of the Roman Catholic Church and left the Pope a beggar. Nearly destroyed the Roman Catholic Church. They overthrew all the monarchical governments of Europe, kicked out all the papal kings, and elected their own governments, and wrote their own constitutions and laws. No longer were they under the authority of the Roman Catholic Church or Roman Catholic canon law. They took the sword out of the Pope's hand and put it in the hands of the people. That's how close the papacy was nearly destroyed. There was a mortal wound to the head of the papacy at the time of the Protestant Reformation. And it seemed, for all intents and purposes, that it wouldn't be long before the papacy would be relegated to the ash bin of history. And it was Ignatius Loyola's responsibility, his job, to overthrow the Protestant Reformation and to kill it and to kill everything that came out of it. So when the Pope was ready to rule the world, when the Jesuits could conquer the world for the Pope, there would be no Protestant threat. And the first order of business was to destroy any knowledge in the world that the papacy was regarded by all the Protestant reformers, without exception, to be the Antichrist. And they did it through futurism. They taught and convinced the Protestant world that the Pope is not Antichrist. The papacy is not the Antichrist. Antichrist doesn't come until the last 7 years of time. They twisted and perverted Daniel chapter 9, verse 24 through 27, particularly verse 27, and made the world believe that Antichrist won't appear on the scene until the last 7 years before Christ's return. And if you believe that, then you have to believe that the Protestant Reformation was a rebellion against the true authority of Jesus Christ on the earth, the papacy. Okay? You can't have it both ways. The Pope is either the Antichrist or he is the vicar of Christ on earth. That's what it boils down to. And how easy it was for the Jesuit order to destroy the Protestant Reformation by simply convincing the Protestants that the papacy is not the Antichrist. Once that is achieved, then the only answer is that the Pope must indeed be what he claims to be, the replacement of Jesus Christ on the earth, and the Roman Catholic Church is the one holy Roman Catholic and Apostolic Church outside of which there is no salvation. Now you have your ecumenical movement. Now the Pope can rule the world without opposition. Thank you, Ignatius Loyola. I see we've come to the end of the program. I hope I've given my listeners some food for thought. Until we meet again tomorrow morning, we'll continue our discussion of Footprints of the Jesuits by R.W. Thompson. You've been listening to Inquisition Update on FirstAmendmentRadio.com. I'll see you tomorrow.
Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, C-R-O-S-S, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.